All right, welcome back to Overcome Babylon. I'm your host, Abraham Ojeda. So far, we've done an overview of the 70 weeks or 70 Shabua of Daniel. We've looked at verse 24. Now we're going to look at verse 25. And the information that you're going to check out in this presentation is so huge. I honestly don't have words for it. Let's just get into it. All right, so first things first, before we get into anything else, I have a huge question for you. And I want you to think about this, really. How many people do you personally know, or maybe that you've heard of, let's just say that you've heard of also, that have lived to be 120 years old? Okay, how many people? Just think about that question. We're going to come back to that, but just think about that. And so anyways, we're going to move on to verse 25, like I mentioned. And let's go ahead and look at, the Hebrew and do basically what we've been doing and let the Bible explain itself. Let the text speak for itself. Let's not throw our Western mainstream, especially the mainstream religious point of view. Let's not throw any of that stuff in there. It's like, what is the Hebrew? What is the culture? What is the language? What is God saying to us? And so now that you've seen kind of how I study the Bible, it's very word for word. I'm going to move a little faster through the rest of the prophecy. And you really should be looking up these words on blueletterbible.org or a similar concordance or some similar studying tool, whether print or digital, doesn't matter. Blueletterbible.org is nice. It's online. It's free. Okay. Before we go further too, like if you haven't checked out the previous two episodes, episode 2, episode 3 of the podcast, you really should, because we're going to start getting into some really, really good stuff, and it won't make sense at this point, I don't think, if you just kind of start here. But it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. So that's Proverbs 25:2. That's from the New King James Version, okay? It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. So the reason I'm making such a big deal about this before going forward is because the information that you're about to learn is going to be very specific. It's not guessing games whatsoever. And because of that, though, a lot of people are going to accuse me of being some kind of a date setter or being in some kind of Kool-Aid drinking cult or something like that, right? But all I'm doing and all I've been showing you, which you can verify for yourself, is what the Hebrew scriptures already have revealed to us about the 70 Shabua of Daniel on an accurate and well-researched timeline of events, which we're going to dive into way more in this episode. So verse 25 begins by saying, "Know therefore and understand." Let me just read the whole thing. "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times." But it starts by saying, "Know therefore and understand." The first thing I'll point out here is that we are being told yada, know and understand sakal. It's not a suggestion, okay? It's not a simple suggestion, a polite suggestion. This is a command, know. So like whenever I talk to people, just, random people I come across in life, or just, family, friends, a lot of people will quote this to me. They'll say, yeah, but Jesus said no one knows the day or the hour of his return, or something like that. Okay, but don't be like that, because that's not what this verse is telling you. This verse is telling you know and understand the 70 Shabua. Know and understand, okay? The scripture here is telling us this. It's very, very specific, very obvious that we should know this. Or at least, we should at least be trying, right? And what Yeshua was talking about in the New Testament when he said no one knows the day or hour, this is something totally different. And we'll probably touch on that in a later episode, but that's totally different. He's talking about something very specific, by the way. But anyways, the two words being used here, going forth, Mosa, of the command, Dabar. We're going to get into these two words, Mosa. We're going to get into Mosa more later. Dabar. Let's just look at Dabar. We're being told to begin the counting, the entire 70 Shabua, with a command that was spoken. So if we go to the outline of biblical usage, this specifically is referring to Dabar, which is 1697, in the Strongs. It specifically is speech, word, speaking. It's something that's spoken, okay? It's very, very key, very, very critical to understand the prophecy, okay? It was a command that was given by speech, which is what Dabar is telling us when we look at the Strong's Concordance, okay? This is a big thing. So we're going kind of quick through this, but we're gonna get a lot deeper. But just bear with me. So the next line is to restore and build Jerusalem. So look up these two words: restore and build. Shub and bana. Okay, the first one's shub. This is the same word that's used to describe repentance or turning back to God. So there's a lot of Strong's usages for this word. So I would look at the law of first mention verse to better understand it, which is actually Genesis 3:19. So it says, man returns to dust. So the idea, and that's the word, shub, man shubs to dust. Man returns to dust, Genesis 3:19. So the idea is to go back to the starting point. Okay, that's really how I like, when I see it, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Go back to the starting point. Okay, well, that's interesting. What does that mean? And then, so shub, bana, Yerushalayim. So bana, let's look at bana. It means to build or rebuild. It could be, build again or build for the first time. And then we look at Yerushalayim. It's the ancient capital of Israel, and it's also the modern day. But they're both straightforward. Shub, bana, Yerushalayim. Okay. This is where things could get really, they are going to get really radically, totally different from mainstream points of view when I start to unpack this for you. So, to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. That's what it says, what the text is telling us. So most people take Messiah here to mean it's talking about Jesus, Yeshua. Remember, I always refer to him in his Hebrew. Sometimes I'll say Jesus, but most of the time I just say Yeshua. It's just a preference, that's all. But because this is his Hebrew name. But this word has been used throughout Scripture, the Hebrew Scriptures, and it refers to a wide variety of people. So it simply means anointed. So if you look at Strong's 4899, Mashiach is how it's pronounced. It just means anointed. And we've already looked at this a little bit, but we're going to look at it more. We have to take a closer look. But it literally until Messiah the Prince, it just says Mashiach Nagid. Let's look at Mashiach. So look at the outline of biblical usage. This is from Blue Letter Bible, of course. It's anointed one. It could be the king of Israel. It could be the high priest of Israel. It could be Cyrus. It could be the patriarchs as anointed kings. So did you know, this is a key question, did you know that this word rarely is used to refer to the Messiah Yeshua? That's so key. Yet this is like we're being told, no, there's no other way to look at this. It's Jesus. It's just not. I'll show that to you. But Mashiach simply means anointed, a consecrated person. Okay. But let's do something fun together. Okay. Let's do something fun. Let's take the logic of modern day Western religions and seminaries and pastors and all these churches, and let's just look at a random verse. Okay. That uses the word Mashiach. Okay, so let's look at 1 Samuel 24:10. A little background here. David had the opportunity to kill Saul, but because Saul was persecuting him and trying to kill him, and basically God, God delivered Saul into King David's hands, but David actually spared him. So this is what David says: "Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eye spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is Jehovah's anointed." So if I wanted to, I could actually translate this verse as follows, and it would still be technically correct. I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is Jehovah's Messiah. Now, obviously, and if you look at the Strongs, I have it right here on the screen. If you're a listener, it's just I have it on the screen. I'm going, so I'll narrate, to help you out as much as possible. But check out our content on BitChute, Brighteon, Rumble. But I have all the Hebrew right here on the screen. Hu Yehovah Mashiach. Like, it literally uses the word Messiah there. But is this verse talking about Jesus the Messiah? No, of course not. Okay, it's talking about Saul. So the bottom line, just to give you an example, is that the Messiah, the word Mashiach, is used in a ton of places throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. And it's not blasphemy or somehow irreverent towards God to use the word Mashiach to describe various people that were simply anointed. That's all it means. So that's just how the Hebrew language works. But that's the issue that we have in our modern day. And that's why we've been taught like humongous lies about this prophecy and other parts of Scripture as well, because people automatically make assumptions, and it just shows a huge disconnect. Huge disconnect. of our modern culture from the understanding of very simple Hebrew words. I mean, this is elementary school simple, honestly. It's not difficult. An elementary school kid who knows Hebrew could be like, yeah, that could be used this way, okay? It's not hard. Okay, so going back to these words. So what does until Messiah the Prince mean? Why does it say Mashiach Nagid? So if we look at this word, okay, the first thing that really comes to mind, this is what came to my mind, was Yeshua ever referred to as Nagid in the scriptures? We have heard him referred to as the Prince of Peace, and this is in Isaiah 9:6, right? Well, sort of. If you look at Isaiah 9:6, the word that's used, let me just read it. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The word prince there is actually the word sar, and it's not the word nagid. Although these words have similar kind of usages, they're different, okay? And I think this, I'll show you that this is the case. I'll prove it to you. But Daniel chose to use the word nagid instead of sar because he wasn't referring to Yeshua or attempting to quote Isaiah 9:6. And I'll prove this to you. He was not quoting Isaiah 9:6, but if he really wanted to quote Isaiah 9:6, he would have used sar. He chose to use a different word. Okay, so when we look more into nagid, this word, for prince, this is what we find. It could be ruler, prince, captain, leader, governor, noble. So it's like a government type of role, right? Leader, ruler. So the first place we see it used, remember, we have this rule that we use when we study the Bible, law of first mention. Where is something used for the first time in the entire Hebrew scriptures, or Greek? In this case, we're looking at Hebrew, obviously. And the law of first mention is actually 1 Samuel 9:16. This refers to Saul, a military commander and the first king of Israel, who, by the way, was to be Messiah or anointed. Well, I'll show you a little bit more about that later. But this is what 1 Samuel 9:16 says, okay? 1 Samuel 9:16. Tomorrow, about this time, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him commander over my people Israel, that he may save my people from the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people because their cry has come to me. Okay, so that word commander, God is speaking to Samuel, and he's saying, you're gonna anoint my commander, and that word is nagid. It's talking about Saul. So when you look at all the places nagid is used, there's one unique person, very unique, that God himself refers to over and over again as prince, both in history and also prophetical wording. And that person is, okay, and a big question mark. I'll show you who it is later, because this is the person that the prophecy is talking about. But I'll give you a hint, and I think a lot of you Bible students out there, you're already going to figure out who it is, and we'll get to it later. But God made an eternal covenant. He made an eternal covenant with this specific person and his lineage that was unlike anyone else in the entire Bible. That's the hint that I'll give you. Let's keep moving on, though, and we'll get more in the specifics. This is straightforward. So there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's the next line. So we're being told 7 Shabua, 62 Shabua. That's all the Hebrew says. And I show you the Hebrew here on the screen. So we can conclude that the verse 25 is talking exclusively about the first 7 Shabua, which is 7 times 49. Remember, we already covered 49 is 1 Shabua, so 7 times 49. 7 Shabua. And that gives us 343 years. So we're going to talk about the other 62 times 49, which is 3,038 years very soon. Okay, we're going to get there. But we need to unpack what are the first 7 Shabua. What happened here? So again, at the very end of this verse, though, we're still being told more details about Jerusalem. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. So the words to pay attention to here, I pulled them up, are Rehab and Haras. Rehab and Haras. So Rehab is strong 7339. We'll look at that. And then Haras is 2742. We'll look at both of those in more detail. These things will be built Bana. But what are they? And if you look up the word sok, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Sok 6695. It means pressure or distress. It means troubling times, like what it says in the English. So when did this take place exactly? Okay. So let's recap some ideas. In order to figure out the first 7 weeks of this prophecy, we have to understand there is a spoken command to build Jerusalem, the physical city in Israel, along with the Rehab and Haras, during times of distress. And what I'm going to show you is that the first 7 weeks, or 343 years, last from the time a specific spoken command is given until a specific prince. Okay, with that said, this is where the fun begins. Okay, I'm now going to reveal how all this information fits together, and I want you to think once again, how many people do you know that have lived to be 120 years old? Okay, because that's what the Bible teaches, right? This is what it says in Genesis 6:3. And Yehovah said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." That's what it says, though, right? 120 years. So what I'm about to reveal this mystery to you, okay? But before I do, a little bit of background about me, okay? So when I first investigated this topic of longevity, how long people live, lifespan, I personally was really big into health, fitness, dietary supplements, and nutrition. I even worked as an analytical chemist, professionally testing and studying specific supplement formulations that focused on living longer, like Niagen and BioPQQ. Now, I wasn't doing like clinical studies and that sort of thing, but like I was just testing formulas, and my coworkers would kind of make fun of me because I go really crazy on this stuff, and I would be like researching stuff in my cubicle or at home, like, how do these things affect the body? And I was just so fascinated by compounds that really assisted in living longer, healthier, better lives. So, in my journey to understand human nutrition much better, I came across this idea of the blue zone diet and information related to the whole idea of blue zones. So here's what one article from Interesting Engineering has to say, okay? Interestingengineering.com. So what are blue zones? Blue zones are areas of the earth where people live the longest, often reaching well beyond 100 years of age. Compare that to 73.4 years, which was the worldwide average life expectancy in 2019, according to the WHO, okay? So if you go to bluezones.com, you'll actually find even more information about what makes these places where people live super long unique. So there's Greece, there's a place in Icaria, Greece, Loma Linda, California, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, and there's a place called Nicoya, Costa Rica. So the funny thing is, though, even in these blue zones that are totally anomalies, it's just honestly, it only represents a few thousand people. They're not the biggest places in the like hugely populated cities or anything like that, but it's just like these rural kind of communities or whatever. But even these people don't live to be 120 years old on average, and this is as good as it gets. This is as good as it gets, and these people still don't live to be 120. So even though I knew this as a well-researched, just trying to understand the topic of longevity chemist, I never questioned Genesis 6:3. And I kind of just like whatever the pastors kind of were teaching is just like, yeah, 120 years old. That's how long people live, back in the day or whatever, during Abraham's day or whatever. And what about now though, right? But it always remained a complete mystery to me. So what was it possibly talking about? So again, look at the words in bold carefully. His days shall be 120 years. In order to figure out the Daniel prophecy, you absolutely must understand what is being spoken of here. You have to. There's no way around it. Remember one of our golden rules. The Bible's absolute truth, there are no errors. So why, actually this is the question. This is the big question. Why does Psalm 90:10, which I have here on the screen, why does it say this? The span of our years is 70, or with strength 80, yet at best they are trouble and sorrow. How can Genesis 6:3 and Psalm 90 verse 10, how can they both be true at the same time? They contradict each other, right? Of course not. Of course they don't. But obviously the agnostic, atheist, or people who just like don't research this stuff, that they're gonna see a contradiction here. It's gonna maybe make them stumble over their faith, or I don't know. The both verses can't be true. So again, we've already talked about this. Well, let's be honest. No one lives to be 120 years old. It's very rare. It really only gets as good as 80. That's as good as it gets. That's what Psalm 90 verse 10 tells us. And even before COVID and all the artificial problems of inflation, depression because of the lockdowns, supply chain issues, joblessness, homelessness, drug use going through the roof with fentanyl, but before all the BS and all the problems of 2020 happened, the life expectancy, according to the WHO, in 2019 showed that 73.4 years was the average lifespan. And that was the peak of our civilization. That was as good as it's going to get, honestly. Because now we have all these issues. We have COVID and all these other problems. So let's dive into what is this verse talking about. And honestly, if it weren't for the work of Joseph Dumond, he did a really good job kind of breaking ground on this topic. It probably would have taken me a lot longer to connect the dots here, okay? So it turns out that the word that's being used there for 120 years is actually the word shaneh. Okay, look it up in the Hebrew. It's Strong's 8141. And it actually means divisions of time or revolutions of time. It can be used both those ways. Yeah, it can be used as a year, a measure of time. It could be someone's lifespan and age, but it could mean divisions of time or revolutions of time. So the way that I would translate it is I would say, and Jehovah said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 periods of time. All right. Now Psalm 90 verse 10 makes sense, but now the question is, what are the periods of time? And here's what I'm going to say. How long are these periods of time? What if these periods of time are also specifically Shabua, just like in the 70 Shabua of Daniel 9 prophecy? What if we're actually being told here that the days of man shall be 120 Shabua? What if these are the periods of time being spoken of here? Okay, so we're going to put that theory to the test and find out whether it's true or not. So if we do the math, 120 times 49 years and one Shabua, so 120 times 49 gives us 5,880 years. Okay, so what I'm actually saying, what I'm actually just putting down today, I'm putting my neck out there, okay? I'm saying the entire history of mankind as we know it should only last for 5,880 years. That's it. The entire history of man as we know it. So to unlock the Daniel prophecy and also to see where we are in the modern day context of what I'm showing here, of the 5,880 years, the first thing we need to do is simply look at the genealogical records of the Bible and start adding up the years to see if my theory fits. And before we go forward, the reason that we're doing this is because once we come up with these dates, you're going to see how easy it is to fit things into the Daniel prophecy. Not that we're forcing them to fit, they just fit like a hand in glove, no problem. Okay, so before we go forward though, how does God keep track of time? This is the question. And we're given the answer right here in Leviticus 25, 1 through 8. This is how you keep track of time, not Gregorian way, not the Greco-Roman way, not your pastor's way, not the church's, not the mainstream religious way. This is God's way. Okay? He told us we're supposed to count 7 Shabbatot of years, 7 times 7 years. This is in verse 8. So that the time is 7 Shabbatot of years, 49 years. He's saying, keep track of time this way. Keep track of time by the period of 49 years. He actually told us that a long time ago in Leviticus 25, verse 8 specifically. But let's read a little bit here because I really, if you don't understand this concept of a sabbatical year at the end of every 7 years and every 49 years, okay? If you don't understand this right now, you're not going to understand any of the Daniel prophecy. It's just not going to make sense. So this is what Adonai said to Moses. Okay, Adonai said to Moses on Mount Sinai, this is from the Tree of Life version, speak to Bnei Yisrael and tell them, when you come into the land which I give you, the land is to keep a Shabbat, a Sabbath, to Adonai. For 6 years you may sow your field, and for 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there is to be a Shabbat rest for the land, a Shabbat to Adonai. You are not to sow your field or prune your vineyard. You are not to reap what grows by itself during your harvest, nor gather the grapes of your untended vine. It is to be a year of Shabbat rest for the land. Whatever the Shabbat of the land produces will be food for yourself, for your servants, and for your maidservant, for your hired worker, and for the outsider dwelling among you. Even for your livestock and for your animals that are in your land, all its increase will be enough food. And that's what I already read verse 8. You were to count off 7 Shabbatot of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time is 7 Shabbatot of years, 49 years, okay? Let's keep going to Leviticus 25, 9 through 12. Okay, then on the 10th day of the 7th month, on Yom Kippur, you are to sound a shofar blast. You are to sound the shofar all throughout your land. You are to make the 50th year holy and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It is a jubilee to you. That's so key. When each of you is to return to his own property and each of you is to return to his family. That 50th year will be your jubilee. You are not to sow or reap that which grows by itself, or gather from the untended vines. Since it is a jubilee, it is to be holy to you. You will eat from its increase out of the field. So if that doesn't make sense, because you're not supposed to reap, like how are you going to eat? But we'll touch on it. But basically, you're not allowed to store it. You're not allowed to freeze, can, dehydrate, or whatever. You're not allowed to store the food. You're only allowed to go eat what you're going to eat for that day, for the whole 50th year of jubilee. That's what it means by you're not to sow. Like, he's not saying go starve to death. He's saying you're not to sow things and then reap, meaning you're not supposed to like harvest it and store it for long periods of time. So There's a connection here, huge connection. And I'm going to tie this and connect these dots later, but 2 Kings 19:29. Hezekiah is given a sign that he was going to be protected by the Assyrian king when they were being invaded. Judah was being invaded, okay? This is what it says. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year such as grows of itself, and in the second year what springs of the same. Also in the third year sow and reap, plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them. We're being told here, if you connect the dots, that 2 Kings 19:29 is a Jubilee year because they weren't allowed to sow. He's like, you're supposed to eat what springs from the same. You're not allowed to sow. We're going to touch on that more. I just wanted to go ahead and just show you that first before we move on. Okay, but so let's look at Leviticus 25:20 through 22. And if you say, well, what shall we eat in the seventh year, since we shall not sow nor gather in our produce? This is so cool. This is what it says. Then I will command my blessing on you in the sixth year, and it will bring forth produce enough for 3 years. And you shall sow in the eighth year, and eat of the old produce until the ninth year, until its produce comes in, you shall eat of the old harvest. So, this is, again, so key to understanding the 120 Shabua of man and the 70 Shabua of Daniel, okay? Normally, on any given seventh year, which is a sabbatical year, you are allowed to sow the next year, the eighth year. But the exception is that you are not allowed to sow on the 50th year of Jubilee after a 49th year. Just keep that in mind. I will, I know these are a lot of little details, but we're gonna flesh this out. We're gonna make sure it makes sense later, okay? So again, before we remember what I said, we're gonna go through the genealogical records to figure out what these periods of time, how they all work together. So before I break this down, just understand that I'm using the King James Version for these genealogical records because of its accuracy in following the Masoretic text. Some of the other texts, they do some weird stuff. So Masoretic, King James Version's pretty good at this. So we're going to go ahead and look at Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11. Those are the two places you need to start. And you've got a bunch of years already, okay? So Genesis 5 gives us all the years from Adam to Noah's son Shem. So from Adam to Shem. And the book of Jasher notes that Noah was 502 years old when he begat Shem, but you can also calculate his age based on the birth year of Shem's son Arphaxad, okay? So that's just a little detail there. It'd probably make more sense if you actually went through and did it yourself, which I have, obviously. But Genesis chapter 11 then brings us from Shem to the birth of Abraham. So all you do is add up the ages of the fathers when they have their firstborn sons in order to figure out the number of years. And you will get 1,948 years. If you need help counting it, there's a link here. It's a Wikipedia entry. I will make this presentation available for download. So you can download this and you can click on the links and stuff that I have on the presentation. But pretty straightforward. But if you need help, there's a Wikipedia genealogies of Genesis article. It's actually pretty helpful. So next, we look at Abraham's life, okay? So he was 75 when he left his homeland of Haran. And on that day, Yehovah cut a covenant with Abraham. That was Genesis 15. Okay, that was specifically verse 18. So this covenant is super important for our timeline because Paul tells us in Galatians 3:17 that the law came 430 years later after the covenant was made. So this is actually going to help a lot with our timeline, but also we are told that Abraham's descendants will be mistreated in a land not their own for 400 years. That was Genesis 15:13. So we're going to revisit this concept and what Paul said later. And then Hagar conceives and gives birth to Ishmael. That's Genesis 16. And that also helps us with our timeline because Abraham and Ishmael are both circumcised and we're given their ages in Genesis 17. So Abraham was 99 years old. Ishmael was 13 years old. We subtract those. And we also subtract 1 year for Hagar being pregnant. And we actually get 85 years old. So with that information, we can say that Abraham was somewhere between 75 years old when he left his homeland of Haran and 85 years old when he had basically Ishmael. I believe it was that was the year he had Ishmael. So between 75 and 85, that's when the Genesis 15:18 covenant was made. That is so important between those years, 10-year period of time. It's somewhere in there, okay? Then Genesis 21:5, Isaac was born to Abraham when he was 100 years old. That's what we're told. So we already have a bunch of years, remember, from Genesis 5 and 11. So we add that, we can add 100 to that. We have 2,048 after creation. When we get to Isaac, boom, 2,048 years after creation. So Then what happens? We have Jacob is born, his 12 sons are born, Joseph's famine happens, and the Exodus all take place. Those are a lot of events. Those are a lot of years. Before we can really unpack this, though, there's just a couple things we have to consider as well. Israel and the mixed multitude began traveling to the promised land in the second year after the Exodus from Egypt had taken place. This is Numbers 10:11. It came to pass on the 20th day of the second month in the second year that the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle of the testimony. So we have to account for these 2 years in our chronology, in our timeline. We have to account for these 2 years because they didn't go straight after the Exodus. They didn't go straight to the promised land after that. There was like a 2-year period of time. They're given the law on Mount Sinai, and there's all these things that happen. Okay, but this is what happens, right? Israel became faithless even after seeing tons of miracles after the 12 spies had returned and they were supposed to conquer the land. So the 12 spies are sent out. Only 2 of them give a good report. The rest of them give a bad report, and Israel believes the bad report. And they're like, oh my gosh, you brought us out to kill us. Why would you do this to us, God? And because of their faithlessness, they just didn't have faith. I mean, they already saw the Red Sea parted, for crying out loud. They were judged for 40 years. So according to the number, this is what Numbers 14:34 says. According to the number of days in which you spied out the land, which was 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt, namely, guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. So they were rejected by God for 40 years, okay? So after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and all the men of war die from the Exodus, the original Exodus, the following happens, which is extremely important to understanding God's timeline. Joshua 5:10 through 12. So chapter 5, verse 10 through 12. The children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain, on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna. But they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Okay, and they, see my arrow on the screen here? They didn't sow that year. Okay, this is so key. This is so key. Then Adonai said to Moses on Mount Sinai, this is Leviticus 25, 1 through 2. We were already told a while ago, but I didn't emphasize it, but now I'm going to. Speak to Bnei Israel and tell them, when you come into the land which I give you, the land is to keep a Shabbat to Adonai. So the connection here between Joshua 5:10 through 12 and Leviticus 25, 1 through 2 is that they entered the land on a Jubilee year, which I will prove to you, okay? So all we have to do is remember, you're not allowed to sow on a Jubilee year, and they didn't sow. They ate the food of the land of Canaan the whole entire year because they just showed up. They didn't sow the land. They didn't farm the land. They just showed up. And anyways, it was a Jubilee year. I'll show that to you. So all we have to do, now that I've given you probably more information than you know what to do with at this point, but just hang with me, hang tight, okay? We're gonna break it all down. It'll all make sense. I'll show you some charts, some tables. It'll be great. All we have to do now is figure out the time of the Exodus, which had obviously already happened by the time we reached Joshua 5:10, which was a Jubilee year. So here's the math that we're looking at. I have it right here on the screen. Year of the Exodus. Then we had the 2 years because they didn't travel right away. Then we had the 40 years because they're wandering in the wilderness after being unfaithful. And we have the year of Joshua 5:10. That's how we figure out the math here. But we need to do this following math as well. We take the year before Joshua 5:10, which would be the 49th year. We don't want the 50th year for our equation. We want the 49th year. And we divide that by 49, and we should have an exact whole number if, in fact, Joshua is a 5:10. If, in fact, Joshua 5:10 is a Jubilee year, when we take the 49th year before that, divide it by 49, we'll have an exact whole number with no decimals, an exact whole number. This is the key. This is so key, and this is how you figure out the timeline. So, again, you're probably wondering, well, how does this all fit? Well, we left off with the birth of Abraham. He had Isaac when he was 100 years old, so we were at 2,048 years. Remember, we are told that about the 400 years that Abraham's descendants will be mistreated in a land not their own in Genesis 15:13. Paul tells us in Galatians 3:17 that the law came 430 years later after the covenant. All right, here's how it fits. Here is the boom. This is the secret. I have Galatians 3:17 on the left in the blue. I have Genesis 15:13 on the right, okay? I'm going to break both of these down individually. Just understand that we're looking at From Abraham's birth, we can actually figure out the date of the Exodus, and from Isaac's birth, we can figure out the date of the Exodus. So first, let's look at Abraham. So 1948 is when he was born, after creation. We've already figured that out from looking at Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. What I'm going to say, though, is that, remember, he was between 75 and 85 years old when the Genesis 15:18 covenant was made with him. Let's go ahead and say it's 80 years. He was 80 years old when the covenant was made. And then from that point, Paul tells us, remember, 430 years to the Exodus. So we can say, until the law was given at Exodus. So from Abraham's birth to the covenant to the Exodus, we have 2,458 years from creation. That is the date that we're going to go ahead and say that's the date for the Exodus. I'll prove it to you in a second. So here's how we can also look at Isaac's life, and it fits also. 2048 was Isaac's birth after creation. 10 years, we have to add to that 10 years to Isaac's feast. The feast that Abraham threw for Isaac was a big party. And there was mistreatment by Ishmael. This is what a lot of people don't realize. I never realized it until I started looking into this. The 400-year count of mistreatment in a land not their own, that prophecy, starts right here when Isaac is mistreated by Ishmael. And you might be thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. Let's look at it. This is what Genesis 21:8-9 says. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Okay, so you might be wondering, well, how could Isaac be 10 years old and the party where he was mistreated, the same day that he was weaned was when that party took place? He was weaned at 10 years old? He was on breast milk until 10 years old? Like, that's impossible, right? Well, that's the thing. This is a mistranslation into the English. This happens a lot. This is why you have to go back to the Hebrew. That's why, like, I'm so pissed off when I just think back. Like, I'm not too salty about it anymore, but it pisses me off so much thinking about how there's all these debates in Christian, Western, Judeo-Christian churches about King James only and this translation or oh my gosh, freaking go back to the Hebrew, man. You got to go back to the Hebrew. It just pisses me off like crazy just to hear people arguing over English translations. What happened here in this particular case, which I think you'll understand my frustration, is that the English translators like, oh, this sounds like a good idea. Let's throw the word same in there, and there's no Hebrew word for that being used in the original text. The words for same are Strong's 6106 SM, and then who, which is Strong's 1931. Those are usually used for the word same, but they're not used here. So we're actually being force-fed the translator's bias, their imagination, their interpretation of the original text, but it's not actually what the text said. There's no word for same here. So what it actually says is, Abraham made a great feast, and sometime later, Isaac was weaned. That's really what it should say. Okay? And what I'm telling you is that it's actually 10 years, and then we have 400 years to the Exodus, and we arrive at the same exact date, 2,458 years from creation. So that is how the 400 years of mistreatment prophecy fits. So this is where the math gets really fun. We have 2,458 years from the creation to Exodus. We have 2 years until actual traveling to the promised land begins. They spy out the land. They become unfaithful. There's 40 years of punishment. So we add all that up. We get 2,500 years. That is the year of Joshua 5:10. We take the year before that, 2,499. We divide that by 41 years and one Shabua, or Jubilee cycle, as they're commonly known as Jubilee cycles. I like to call them Shabua. And we get exactly, no decimals. We get exactly 51 Shabua. That's why I said Isaac wasn't 9 years old. He wasn't 8 years old. He wasn't 11 years old, 12 years old. He was 10 years old. That's why I said Abraham was, he wasn't 79. He wasn't 70. From the age of 75 to 85, he wasn't anything. He was 80 years old, because this is how it fits. The math fits so perfectly, and we don't have to. We're not trying to force the numbers. It's just the numbers fit when you do 80 for Abraham and 10 for Isaac. Those years. Okay. So one thing before we kind of move forward here, though, is that we're counting by 49 years per cycle, not 50. Okay. So we don't divide by 50. We don't multiply by 50 to figure out our math. We do 49, 49, 49. Because remember, the 50th year is actually the Jubilee year, but it's not only the 50th year of the previous cycle, it's the first year of the next cycle. So there is no year 50 in our cycles, in our Shabua, we only do 49s. Okay, just want to clear that up. Just clear that up. We're not doing dividing by 50 and stuff like that. We're dividing by 49, 49, 49, 49. Okay. So before unlocking the 70 Shabua of Daniel prophecy, though, I must show you an overview of the entire 120 Shabua of mankind, because there's some dates that we're going to use to actually unlock the Shabua of Daniel. So far we've only covered the first 51 of the 120. I'm going to bring you to the present day, which is going to reveal all the secrets. So we still have 69 Shabua left because we hit 51. So the way we solve this mystery of, man's days shall only be 120 periods of time is to get to the present day by figuring out where all the rest of the Jubilee years are throughout history. So the way we do this is by looking at historical works, honestly. This is how you figure it out. So remember I told you, I'm going to stick to I said this like the first episode when we started going into Daniel. I'm going to stick to the Bible, nothing but the Bible. Well, there's a little exception here because quite frankly, you have to verify things with archaeological sources, history, and we have to figure out contemporary dates and Gregorian years. So yeah. Anyways, don't try to, don't get on me for that because you look at historical references. So here's some contemporary dates. Okay, I have a list here. This is a list of sabbatical and Jubilee years. Okay, this is a mix of Joseph Dumon's video presentation. I have a link right here. It's called the Jubilee Cycles Part 1 of 2. That's on YouTube. You can also get this free download of a PDF called The Sabbath and Jubilee Cycle by Kadesh LaYahweh Press. And you can also get Antiquities of the Jews, which, it predates copyright, modern copyright laws, so that you can get that for free on Gutenberg. So I have all this free stuff here. Again, you're going to be able to download this presentation. I'll put a link in the description. All these things you're able to access and look and verify for yourself. So the first one that I have is 701 BC. Judah is attacked by Sennacherib. And again, the work here that I'm citing is Thiel, the mysterious numbers of the Hebrew kings. Nehemiah 8:10. Okay, that was a very important year. First Maccabees 1:14 and Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. That's how we get 162 BC, 134 BC, 43 BC, 36 BC, 22 BC, 42 AD, 56 AD, 70 AD, 133 AD, and finally 140 AD. I have all those dates, okay? Those are either sabbatical or Jubilee years, meaning they're either the 7th year or they're the 50th year, okay? So here's the real trick. Here's the real secret, though. We actually only need one date to figure everything out, and it has to line up with our previous numbers of years, which was 2,500 from Joshua 5:10. So the one easy date that's like super confirmed with outside sources and scripture is 701 BC, and this is the scripture that I talked about earlier. I was like, we're going to connect the dots. 2 Kings 19:29. This shall be a sign to you. You shall eat this year what grows of itself, the second year what springs of the same, and on the third year sow and reap. So this is what we look at my arrows. Specifically, Yehovah was telling, I believe it was Isaiah. Yeah, Isaiah the prophet. Boom, 49th year, 50th year, 51st year. 49, 50, 51. That's what he's showing. That's what he was talking about. He was telling him this is going to be the sign. The Sabbath is a sign to you. That's actually what it says in the original place that the Sabbath was given. It's a sign. In the Ten Commandments, it's a sign. And this also is a sign. The sabbatical year and Jubilee year is a sign. So anyways, there's a connection there. But 49th year, 50th year, 51st year. So what was the date of 2 Kings 19:29? That's the next thing we're going to figure out. We are told that the sabbatical 49th and 50th Jubilee year would be assigned to King Hezekiah. And then what happens next? It's the coolest thing ever. The scripture tells us that Sennacherib is defeated by the angel of Yehovah when 185,000 men are killed. That's just as Isaiah had prophesied. Okay, these are the lists of the historical works that confirm the date to be 701 BC when Sennacherib attacks Judah during the 14th year of the reign of Hezekiah. We are able to figure out that this is 701 BC because of Sennacherib's annals. Okay, these are artifacts located in London, Chicago, and Israel. I have them here on the screen. They're pretty cool looking. They tell us like a recount of what happened. It's actually it's different from the biblical narrative, which is weird. But the point is that they give us that time frame, and then we can look at the Assyrian Limu, the Assyrian Eponym, and Ptolemy's Canon, and these different works all line up and give us the date of the reign of Sennacherib, and then we can figure out the date of the year of the Hezekiah was given the Jubilee year. So it's all there. 701 BC is the 49th sabbatical year, and 700 BC is the Jubilee year. Okay? Again, confirmed by outside sources, confirmed by looking at 2 Kings. Okay? So now we can look... Was it 2 Kings? Yeah, 2 Kings 1929. So now we can go back in time and have a complete list of dates for the sabbatical years and the 120 Shabua of mankind. By the way, I'm saying all we need is one day, but guess what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to be looking at all those other dates. I had that on that list, 70 AD, all those different dates. Those also are going to line up with this, okay? And so what did I do? So here's what all I did. I took the Genesis 6:3 verse. I went ahead and put everything into Excel. Everything into Excel. I put the Shabua cycle, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 120. I put the year since creation, and then next to that I put the Gregorian year, so BC and AD years, okay? And Excel did all the math for me. I didn't fudge the numbers. I just put it, add 49, subtract 49, whatever. Just 49, 49, 49. And what we find is, not only does Joshua 5:10, the year after creation, 2499, fit perfectly, it's completely in line also with 2 Kings 1929, the year 701 BC, and the Gregorian year, which actually is 3136 from creation. And that's the 64th Shabua cycle. And look what we can do with those dates now. And again, there's more dates to confirm than just this, but these are just the ones that I'm using for now, not to make this presentation basically a 40, 50-hour teaching or whatever, right? And when we get to the 120, oh my gosh, man. My palms are sweaty right now. When we get to the 120th Shabua of mankind, guess what year in the Gregorian year that is? Man's days shall only be 120 periods of time. Drum roll, please. That brings us to the year 2044. That's 22 years from now. In the year 2022. Can you believe it? We're in the last days. We're in the last days. We're in the last days. I've heard people say that for a long time now, but they're guessing. They were freaking guessing. I'm telling you we're in the last days, and I'm showing you with biblical evidence and proof that we're in the last days, and we only have 22 years until this period of time, mankind as we know it is over. Do you understand? The significance of what I'm showing you here is so big. The 5,880 years. The year 2044. This is what Genesis 6:3 was talking about. The year 2044 will mark the end of the history of mankind as we know it. And this final Shabua that we are currently living in started in 1996. Okay? So big, man. This is so big. So big. And we have a framework now. There's so much stuff I'm going to show you because of this table, these dates, the Jubilee. He told us to count by 49s. That wasn't a suggestion. He's like, this is how you keep track of the history of mankind. Count by 49s. And so now we have all these dates to work with. We have the framework. We understand the Shabua. So here's where we left off in the Daniel prophecy, okay? Now that we understand the 120 Shabua of mankind, there is a spoken command to build Jerusalem, the physical city in Israel, along with a Rehab and Horus, during times of distress. That's where we left off. Number 2, we also need to figure out the first 7 weeks or 343 years that last from a specific command that was spoken until a specific prince. Boom. When I started dissecting and trying to understand what this verse is really, truly, actually talking about, this is so amazing. I came across a psalm that reads unlike any other psalm in the entire Bible. Now, the Psalms, they're songs. It's a songbook. The Psalms are a songbook to be played with musical instruments and so forth. But the words in the Psalms are very poetic, but they also have oftentimes they use imagery and different types of meanings. It's still very literal because it's written in Hebrew, but sometimes they can be a little bit more deep. But no psalm reads like Psalm 78 verse 1 through 3. No, not just verse 1 through 3, the whole entire Psalm 78. So this is what it says: a contemplation of Asaph. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. Okay? Those are the first 3 verses of Psalm 78. I recommend reading the whole thing, obviously. When you look up the words dark sayings, which I have here in bold, it's Strong's 2420, which is Hida. And what it means is riddle, dark sayings, hard question, dark sentence, proverb, dark speech. It could be a riddle, difficult question, parable, enigmatic saying or question, perplexing saying or question, okay? But this is the issue that I had. Like, when you read Psalm 78, there's nothing mysterious or tricky about it at all. It's pretty straightforward. It's like, huh? How is this a parable? Like, how is this a dark saying? What he does, though, in Psalm 78, is he tells the history of Israel specifically from Moses to David. And what I believe that this parable, this dark saying is referring to, is that Asaph was actually speaking of a prophetic mystery for those of us, you and I, living in the last days. This is for us, actually, to understand Daniel. This blew me away. Because what you're about to find out is that of all the spoken commandments written in the Bible that could possibly fit into our timeline, none of them is more significant than Moses and the burning bush. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Exodus 3:10. Remember, the two words used here from the going forth of the command, Mosa Dabar. We have to pay attention to the word Mosa. You have to. Look at what I have in bold here. It means a lot of things. It can mean exportation, a fountain, a gate. But look at the things I have in bold. This is how Mosa is used. An exit, dawn, the rising of the sun in the east, brought out, and it actually means east. So Mosa Dabar could be interpreted, as the spoken command to exit towards the east. And oh my gosh, this is so huge. Oh my gosh, this is so huge. God's people have had to travel east across the Red Sea in order to get to Mount Sinai and eventually the Promised Land. Okay, what has the mainstream seminaries, what have the mainstream churches been telling us? The decree of Cyrus in Persia and Babylon, he was the one. Yes, that was the spoken command to go rebuild Jerusalem, and Nehemiah built the walls, and it was so amazing. And then Jesus came, and it was so great. You cannot freaking travel east from Babylon to get to Canaan or Sinai or any, sorry, not Canaan or Sinai. You cannot travel east from Babylon to get to Jerusalem, which is what Nehemiah, he built the walls of Jerusalem. You can't travel from Babylon to Jerusalem and go east. You have to go west. But you can travel east from Egypt to get to Jerusalem, to get to the Promised Land. Do you understand now that, people have been just not even looking at the Hebrew of what this means. It's a spoken command to go to the east, okay? It's so ridiculous, man. I just, these pastors, these people just get paid to just study the Bible all day. Some of them have really just ridiculous mortgages. I've heard of people having vineyards and planes and, the really, really big mega churches. They get paid to study the Bible for a living, and they can't even freaking look at the Hebrew word, Mosa, and understand that this is talking about going east. Or, look, I understand, just understand my frustration. I'm not saying, look at me, I'm so good, look at me, I figured all this stuff out, and I did all this research, and I confirmed and verified, other sources, what they had to say about it. All I'm saying is, there's a spiritual blindness, apparently, and this is some hidden information, because everybody, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christians, the evangelicals, the Catholics, they're all teaching their people that the decree of Cyrus to build Jerusalem and Nehemiah building the walls of Jerusalem is this prophecy. But the word Mosa, it means to go east, and it just does not fit. It's just so, it's just... And you can see it on the map. I have a map here. You can see where Babylon is. It's right between the Tigris and Euphrates. You can see Nippur. It's next to Nippur, Ur, Mesopotamia. You have to go west. Okay, sorry. I'm ranting. Let's go back and look at Mashiach Nagid, okay? Okay. So you understand the spoken command. I'm saying it's Moses in the burning bush. So let's go look until Messiah the Prince, okay? Spoken command, now to Messiah the Prince. Mashiach Nagid, that's what it says. We've already covered how King Saul was actually the first king of Israel and the first Mashiach Nagid mentioned in all the scriptures. Saul was the very first Mashiach Nagid. It turns out, when you look at the timeline that I have already revealed to you, Daniel, I put Daniel, it should say David, I'll fix that later. David is the Mashiach Nagid being referred to in this verse. which is exactly what the parable and dark mystery of Psalm 78 told us. It was the history of from Moses to David. So, when you look at all the places Nagid is used, there is one person that God himself refers to over and over again, both in history as well as prophetic wording, and that person is King David. God made an eternal covenant with David. Remember I mentioned that earlier? He made a covenant with a very specific person that's eternal, and that's David. There are so many scriptures to talk about when it comes to David's kingship, but look at what Samuel told Saul after Saul disobeyed the commandment of God and lost his kingship. So 1 Samuel 13:14. Now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord Yehovah has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and Yehovah has commanded him to be Nagid, commander, over his people, because you have not kept what Yehovah commanded you. So we're being told specifically, there's somebody coming who's going to be Nagid. It's not you, Saul. Here's what David said while giving a speech in Jerusalem. David is saying this. He's saying he was chosen to be prince, Nagid, forever. Here's what it says. 1 Chronicles 28:4. 1 Chronicles 28:4. However, Yehovah God of Israel chose me above all the house of my father to be king over Israel forever. And for he has chosen Judah to be the Nagid. And the house of Judah, the house of my father, among the sons of my father, he was pleased to make me king over all Israel. So he was the Nagid. Make no mistake, he was Nagid. Okay, so now we're going to look at an overview of the first 7 Shabua, which is 343 years, from Moses all the way to King David. I know this is a little overwhelming, so I'm going to break it down piece by piece. The first box is a green box, so what I'm going to say is, and I'm going to prove it to you that it's correct, 3.5 years before the date of the Exodus, which we already figured out, that's when the command was given. And Moses and Aaron begin to do their work in either 1382 or 1383 BC. So then we add 3.5 years to that, we get the Exodus. Then we add 339.5 years from 1379 BC, which is the same thing as 2458, which we already figured out. It's just the Gregorian. And we arrive at 1040 BC. Okay? Then we're going to go ahead and use the death of Solomon, which is 931 BC, to kind of work backwards. It's a confirmed date in history, King Solomon's death. And what we're going to find out is 1040 BC is actually David's birth year. That's the year of David's birth, the Mashiach Nagid. Okay, let's start with, why am I saying 3.5 years before the Exodus is when the command is given? Here's what we need to know. Okay, there were 10 plagues in Egypt. Okay, and if you're a rancher, if you've dealt with cattle or animals or livestock, you're going to understand this pretty quickly. But the 5th plague, during the 5th plague, I have it right here on the screen, Exodus 9 verse 6. All the livestock of Egypt died during the 5th plague. Okay, it was a severe pestilence. Then the 7th plague, Exodus 9:19, the livestock die again. The livestock of the Egyptians. By the way, the Israelite, God's people's livestock, they don't die. But the Egyptian livestock, all of them die in the 5th. We can assume all of them die in the 7th, or at least a really big portion of them do, because it's hail. The 7th plague are hailstones mixed with fire. And they're huge. So, I mean, the livestock get killed in the 7th plague. And then the 10th plague, which is the final plague, all the firstborn of the livestock of Egypt die again. So that's Exodus 12:29. So it's pretty clear to see what happened here, right? During the 5th plague, all the livestock of Egypt die. And Pharaoh's like hardening his heart. He's like, no, I'm not going to let you go. He hardens his heart against God, against Israel. I'm not going to let you go. So what does he do? All the livestock are dead. I mean, they just sit on his hands like, oh, I guess we don't have any sheep, donkeys, cattle, horses or whatever. No. They went and to surrounding countries and they bought more animals and started reproducing their flocks. So by the 7th plague, they had animals that reproduced enough and they were killed again. And then by the 10th plague, same thing. Either they bought some from surrounding areas or they reproduced whatever they had left. That's kind of the idea here. So do you see the problem? All the livestock died, and it's only possible, like we've been told the Exodus may have happened in just a year or whatever. It had to have been more than a year taking place. The Exodus, the plagues. The plagues had to have happened during a period of at least 2 years, but I'm going to say 3.5 years. I'm going to show you some evidence why. And it all fits, by the way, but it has to be at least 2 years because the cattle need to reproduce and you need to have firstborn to die on the 10th plague. So anyways, remember our golden rule. Our golden rule from the very beginning of this presentation was that God does not lie or change his mind. He's not human, that he should change his mind. That's 1 Samuel 15:29. Jehovah likes to work in very predictable patterns with very specific structure, okay? It's not random. So that's why it's my strong conviction that Moses and Aaron worked for 3.5 years before the Exodus actually took place, because guess what? The same thing's going to happen in the future. 2 witnesses are going to be sent by God before the regathering of Israel takes place, which is called the second Exodus or the greater Exodus throughout the prophets. But there's going to be another Exodus where all the scattered Israelites, all God's people, all everyone who's called by his name, who's sealed, everybody is going to be regathered at a later time. And before that happens, the 2 witnesses are sent. We were told about that in Revelation 11:3. Okay, it says, and I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days. And if you look at the math on that, you take 360 times 3.5, 360 days in a year times 3.5 years gives you 1,260 days. So that's our 3.5 year period of the 2 witnesses in Revelation 11. So it made a lot of sense to go ahead and look at, okay, Moses and Aaron, 3.5 years, boom, there's the date of the command that was given for Daniel's prophecy. And keep in mind, when we're looking at Revelation, the 1,260 days, we're doing 360 days in a year. That's how it works, from new moon to new moon. It's not 365 days like you're probably used to with the Gregorian stuff. But here's the overview again. And so we have then the 3.5 years. We have the date of the Exodus. So we arrive at 1040 BC. So what we do is we actually use the death of Solomon. We count backwards because it's a confirmed date in history. That's 931 BC is when Solomon dies. This is accepted in numerous encyclopedias and historical works. The World History Encyclopedia, I have a link here. You can click on that. Edwin Thiel's The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings is another book that basically clarifies this for us, that 931 BC is a great date. From the death of Solomon, we simply work backwards, okay? So here's what we do. We look at some key verses here. 1 Kings 11:42, we're told that Solomon reigns for 40 years. So since we know his death, 931 BC, we know he reigned for 40 years. Okay, then we count backwards. So that gives us 970 BC when Solomon begins his reign. In order for Solomon to begin his reign, David must have already died. So we go ahead and look at the key verses for David. This is 2 Samuel 5, verses 4 and 5. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned for 40 years. We don't really need verse 5. I just threw it in here because remember the whole 2-house concept, the 2 nations, the northern kingdom, and then the southern kingdom. Not even David was king over all 12 tribes of Israel right from the beginning. He only reigned over Judah for 7 years, and then finally he reigned over Judah and Israel. This is the north and south for the remainder of his 33-year reign. So 40 years total. But anyways, just wanted to point that out, that the 2 houses of Israel, the two distinct people groups of Israel, one in the north and one in the south. Okay, you just got to understand that. That's super key, right? It's just more confirmation that what I was sharing in the earlier episode on who Daniel's people are is solid. Okay, so anyways, David was 30 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 40 years. So we know his reign ended when Solomon started. So again, we take that we subtract 40 years from 971 BC, we get 1010 BC. That's when his reign began. And we were told he's 30 years old. So then in order to basically get David's birth year, we subtract from 1010 BC, in time anyway, it's like adding, but we go back in time, 30 years, and we get 1040 BC. It happens to be the exact date from what we're given in the first 7 Shabua, 343 years from Moses all the way to King David. This should blow your mind at this point. This is so big. This is so huge, man. It fits. It fits perfectly like a hand in glove. It fits so well. The first 7 weeks, 343 years were from the command given to Moses the burning bush to the exact birth year of King David. And not only did we prove that, but we also proved that God does not change. He sent Moses and Aaron 3.5 years before the Exodus. And guess what? He's going to do it again for the greater Exodus. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll cover it in a later episode. But the greater Exodus is going to happen. And it's another 3.5 years of the 2 witnesses doing their work. We're already told that in Revelation 11:3. And it's amazing how we see these patterns in history, in the Bible. And it's going to happen again. It's just so amazing. So once you know who and what the first 7 weeks are talking about, the rest of this is pretty easy. Of all the places on earth, there's one city that's special to Jehovah's heart. And that's Jerusalem, baby. Jerusalem. 1 Kings 11:39. This is what it says. And to his son I will give one tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name there. This city was also the place where Melchizedek, king of Salem or Jerusalem, came from when he met Abraham in Genesis 14:18. So this is what it says, Genesis 14:18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. So we can conclude that remember Shub Bana, to restore and build Jerusalem? That Shub Bana Yerushalayim meant that Jehovah wanted to make this city a place of worship and exalting his name once again, since that was the purpose of the city even before Abraham received the covenant in Genesis 15. Because that happened in Genesis 14 when he met Melchizedek. There's also a connection to Psalm 78, 68 through 69, where Asaph, remember the mysterious Psalm of 78? Asaph actually describes God's sanctuary being built in Zion, which is another name for Jerusalem. That's what Asaph said. So Asaph literally takes us all the way from David being a shepherd boy, or from Moses to David being a shepherd boy and then having a sanctuary in Jerusalem. It's so interesting that Psalm 78 actually ties into Daniel 9:25. So one of the first things that David did when he obtained power as king, as Prince Nagid, he conquered Jerusalem, which was actually controlled by the Jebusites. The original tribe of Judah, they were not able to drive them out. You can read about that in Joshua, okay? They weren't able to drive them out right away. But David comes along and he takes care of business, man. And it's pretty awesome. So this is what it says. In the king, this is 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 10. The king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who spoke to David, saying, "You shall not come in here, but the blind and lame will repel you," thinking, David can't come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. Now, David said on that day, "Whoever climbs up by the way of the water shaft and defeats the Jebusites, the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Therefore, they say, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house." Then David dwelt in the stronghold and called it the city of David. Okay, this is really key right here, okay? And David built all around from the Milo and inward. So David went on and became great, and Jehovah God of hosts was with him. That's 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 10. This happened during a time of war with multiple countries, by the way. It wasn't just the Jebusites. There were also the Philistines at war with Israel. And so the building of Jerusalem during this time fits the description of troublesome times, which is the very end of verse 25 of Daniel 9:25. That fits. We're not making that stretch of imagination. That fits the description. So the next things, the last things that we need to really cover to understand the Daniel 9:25 verse is, what are the street and wall? That's what it says in English, that are being described in the verse I showed you, okay? And what I'm saying is they've actually been described in the verse below also. And again, this is 2 Samuel 5, 8, 9. Yes. It says Milo and inward. That's what David built those things. So if you look up the word Rehob, which is street, it actually means a broad open place or a plaza. Okay? And then Harus is a moat or a trench. A trench, moat, or ditch. I have that circled on the screen. So what it's actually saying is the broad open place or the plaza shall be built again, and the Harus or trench, moat, or ditch, even in troublesome times, which they were at war, so that fits. Okay, so when we look up the word Milo, which is what was being used in 2 Samuel 5:9, and the next Hebrew word, the next to it is inward, those are two words, is Baith. So Milo, Baith, we can conclude that David fulfilled the prophecy because he built the fortification around Jerusalem and the open place within Jerusalem. So if you look at it, Milo, it means part of the fortifications of Jerusalem. We also know that it can mean moat, trench, or ditch. And then inward, that could mean place, within, house, household. So we can say David fulfilled this part of the prophecy. Now, if you want more, this literally could take me like another 30 minutes just to cover what the Milo, what the archaeological findings have been, what the city of David looks like, all the little details of what happened here. I strongly recommend, again, I've mentioned it a couple times, is 2300 Days of Hell by Joseph Dumont. He does a great job going into this. I'm not going to go into as much detail because it's really not necessary. We already have the dates. You already know this isn't talking about Cyrus and Nehemiah. Okay, it's talking about Moses and David. So, and that's what I'm going to say next. David is the only anointed Nagid. Again, he's the only Prince Nagid Mashiach Nagid, who fits the description of having built the fortifications and inward place of Jerusalem. Yeshua the Messiah did do this, okay? It's kind of funny to even say that. But it's not recorded in any of the Gospels that he was digging trenches and building fortifications around Jerusalem during his earthly ministry, so he didn't do it. And so it's not talking about Yeshua at all, but Nehemiah also. A lot of people say, oh, it's Cyrus and Nehemiah. Nehemiah also did not dig trenches or a moat. He only built a wall. And we also, Nehemiah wouldn't fit anyway at this point because the command is to go east, not west from Babylon. So we've solved the mystery of verse 25. We have solved the mystery of verse 25. I have shown you the amazing, just the year of the Exodus, which helped us figure out this prophecy. In order to show you the year of the Exodus, I had to go through the whole 120 Shabua of mankind. I had to go through all these things to reveal this to you because it's so deep. Honestly, it is. Remember at the beginning I said this is a complex prophecy. If you don't know Hebrew culture, Hebrew history, if you're just looking at English words, English translations only, you're not actually digging into Hebrew, the Strong's Concordances, or just at least looking at the Masoretic somehow, you're just shooting in the dark. You're totally guessing. It's total guessing games. But with what I have shown you, how amazing is it? Let's just read it again. This is just mind-blowing. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks. The street shall be built again on the wall, even in troublesome times. We've just gone over the first 7 weeks. But guess what we do now? Guess what we can do now? Now that we know where the 7 weeks, the first ones begin and where they end, now we look at the rest of the 63 weeks. We've got the first 7. Now we look at the rest of them. And oh my gosh, this is going to be so intense. Because what I'm going to show you next is just so mind-blowing. You're going to look and you're going to understand that this prophecy, I'm going to tell you now because you're going to know anyway when you look at the next episode. The 70 Shabua of Daniel, chapter 9, actually takes us all the way to the year 2044. And again, you're going to know why the Great Reset, COVID-19, the UN Agenda 2030, all the stuff that's happening right now, you're going to understand finally why that this has already been prophesied and what you can do about it. You can actually do something about it. You can actually, it's so amazing. Remember what I said at the beginning of this podcast. This is spiritual preparation. Nobody's talking about how relevant, how important, how crazy that this prophecy of what we're going to read next about the trampling underfoot, the abomination of desolation, all these things. We're going to begin to unpack what this actually is talking about. And you're going to understand where Western nations, where the world is headed, and it's not a good place, but you're going to be able to get prepared for that. So I just can't. Spiritual preparedness is the name of the game for this podcast. So before we go on, though, you're probably, for the real Bible students in the crowd, you're like, surely this can't be talking about David and Moses. It has to be talking about Cyrus and Jesus. Because what about Matthew 24:34? Where he said, assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. So a little context. Yeshua just finished talking a lot about end times prophetic events during chapter 24, which is where this verse is located, because his disciples explicitly asked him what to expect during the time of the end in verse 3 of 24. And Yeshua specifically talks about the abomination of desolation, verse 15, spoken by Daniel. This is what it says. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, ... Okay, it continues. But why would he say that this specific generation that he was living in would not pass away until all the things that he just said happened? Again, people use what Yeshua said in Matthew 24, and he said, this will not happen. This generation will not pass away until all these things happen. People use this as justification for saying that what I'm saying is false. They use this as justification to say that all the 70 weeks have already happened. Okay, that's what a lot of people are saying. But all you have to do, again, just answer my question. Let's look at the question. Why did he say that the generation would not pass away until all these things happen? Because that's not what he was talking about. Okay, again, got to go back to the original Greek in the New Testament. That's not what he said. Surely I say to you, this generation, what is the word generation being used there? Genea. If you look at the KJV translation count, you use 42 times. It's used seldomly, but it can be used to say time, age, or nation. So here's another way to look at it. Assuredly I say to you, this period of time will by no means pass away till all things take place. That's how I would translate it. And here's the connection to Genesis 6:3. And Jehovah said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 periods of time. Do you see the connection? Assuredly I say to you, this period of time will by no means pass away. His days shall be 120 periods of time. Yeshua was saying that the very final period of time, the very final Shabua of the complete history of the entire 120 Shabua of man, and also the 70th Shabua of the Daniel prophecy would not pass away until all things happen exactly as they've been prophesied. Oh, he wasn't talking about the generation that was contemporary with him, that lived and rubbed shoulders with him. He wasn't talking about those people. He was talking about the period of time that he was talking about. It's not going to take place. It's not going to pass away, until all these things happen. It's going to happen, then things will move on, but it's going to happen. That's all he was saying. This period of time, it's all going to happen in this period of time. The final Shabua. As we move forward, you're going to understand what the 70th week is. You're going to understand the next 62 weeks before we get to the 70th week. It's going to be mind-blowing. Hopefully your mind has been blown. Some of the feedback that I've been getting has been so intense. And you know what else has been intense, honestly? Are the attacks from the enemy. The devil, the fallen, the demons, whatever you want to call it, they do not want you to have access to information like this. They do not want you to know your history. They do not want you to know the prophecy. They don't want you to know. They want people to think. The devil and his angels want people to think. The demons want people to think that the Bible is a sleeping, totally dead, totally done away with book that has no relevance to today's events. I'm telling you that things are about to get really intense. And I'm going to show you what you can do about that too. I'm not just going to say, oh, look at how bad things are. This is a podcast of preparedness, spiritual preparedness, but also I'm going to show you what's coming. And I'm going to show you with the same accuracy that I've been using to show you the dates of Joshua 5:10, the dates of the Exodus, the dates of 2 Kings 19:29. All these dates I've been showing you. Accurate. Man, you can't make this stuff up. It all fits into the 120 Shabua of man. All these 49-year periods. Count by 49s. We were commanded to count by 49s. We lost that. That's why we've been blind and ignorant. That's why we've been lost, like blind men groping in the dark. Blind men groping in the dark, not knowing what period of time, what period of history we're living in, because nobody counts by 49s. We were told that was for a small country in the Middle East called Jews only, and they're the ones that are supposed to count by 49s. But I'm telling you, we are commanded to count by 49s. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more blessing, there's more revelation, there's more. If we actually just take a little bit of time to just consider and do what the Bible actually tells us to do. It's that simple. It's that simple. Oh my God, man. Just mind-blowing. That this has been hidden from our intelligence. This has been hidden from our consciousness because of a lack of understanding of what God said a long time ago, because we didn't think it applied to us. So with that said, let's not be like blind men groping in the dark. We're going to understand exactly where we are in history, exactly where we're going, and I'm going to show you even more of the secrets of Daniel. In the next episode, we're going to dive into chapter 9, verse 26. And this is where the real deal, very relevant stuff begins to unfold. And we'll understand where we are exactly in the present day, especially verse 29. Until then, be blessed. Sorry for the delay in getting this episode done. I hope to have the next ones up soon. And so keep an eye out for that. I'm praying for you guys. I'm praying for you. Praying for you and all the listeners of this podcast that you would be blessed and that you would be impacted in a huge way by the information, and that you would prove it, that you would test it, that you would test the spirits. We're always supposed to test the spirits and see, hey, is this legit or is this just coincidence? I don't have enough faith to believe all these dates and everything I'm showing you is coincidence. It lines up, man. So, all right. I will catch you guys next time on Overcome Babylon, and we're going to dive into verse 26. Until then, take care. Shalom. I hope you've been blessed by today's episode. If you could give me a like, drop a comment, share this content, or give me a 5-star rating, that would be great, and it would allow more people to hear this message. Whether you're watching on video sites like Rumble, BitChute, Brighteon, or listening in on the podcast, I'd love to know your thoughts and feedback. Also, make sure to visit overcomebabylon.com for more articles, reports, and other great info that I don't always have time to cover here in the podcast. All right, that's all I have for now. I'll see you next time.